Chapter 1. Captured beneath the burning sky. The sun hung like a fiery brand in the empty desert sky, baking the land until even the sagebrush seemed to wither under its weight. Dust rolled off the wagon wheels as Clara Monroe sat beside her father, her bonnet pulled low to shield her eyes. The trail was quiet, save for the steady creak of the wooden axles and the jingle of the mule's harness. "Not far now," her father muttered, spitting into the dirt. "Another 2 hours, and we'll hit the crossing. Then it's smooth riding." Clara nodded, but her stomach nodded. The plains had been too still all morning, the silence almost a warning. Even the meadowlarks had gone quiet. She tightened her grip on the small leather Bible in her lap, whispering a prayer only she could hear. The first scream cut through the air like a whip. From behind the ridges, riders poured down, faces painted in streaks of ochre and ash, long hair whipping in the wind. Arrows hissed past, thudding into the wagon wood. Her father shouted, drawing his rifle, but it was too late. The Apaches were on them. "Clara, down!" he roared. She ducked, clutching her skirts as chaos erupted. Gunfire cracked. Horses screamed. Dust swallowed the world until all she could see were flashes of steel, the flare of feathers, the glint of hard, merciless eyes. Her father fired twice, but a war club swung, catching him across the temple. He crumpled to the dirt with a sound she would never forget. "No, Papa!" Clara shrieked, scrambling toward him. A rough hand yanked her back by the hair. She clawed and kicked, but the warrior only laughed, shoving her into the dust. The ground burned against her palms as a boot pressed her down. Shame and terror mingled hot in her chest. She could hear the wagon burning behind her, the canvas snapping in the fire, the stench of smoke filling her nose. All around, the warriors whooped in triumph, their cries echoing across the wide, empty land. Clara lifted her head, searching for her father. He lay still, blood dark against the sand. A sob tore from her throat, but no one cared. Her wrists were bound in rawhide, the leather biting her skin. The chief, broad-shouldered and painted like a spirit from a nightmare, looked down at her with cold, unreadable eyes. He spoke in words she could not understand, and the men around him laughed. One of them shoved her to her knees before him, forcing her to bow. Clara tasted blood on her lip. Her chest heaved, but she would not cry before them. She raised her chin, glaring into the setting sun, as if daring it to burn her away. Beneath the endless, burning sky, Clara Monroe's world had ended, and her fate as a captive had begun. Chapter 2. The Chief's Son. The Apache camp sat nestled in a dry basin where smoke rose from cooked fires and painted hides flapped in the wind like banners of conquest. Clara stumbled as she was shoved forward, the rawhide biting into her wrists. Dust clung to her dress, and her bonnet was long gone, lost in the chaos of capture. Every sound struck her nerves raw. Children laughing as they chased a stick, women pounding maize with stones, warriors sharpening blades, the clang echoing in her bones. They dragged her to the center, where the great fire pit glowed with fresh coals. The chief, broad, scarred, his hair bound with eagle feathers, stood tall before her. His eyes were hard and unreadable as he spoke to his people, his voice deep as thunder rolling across the desert. The gathered tribe laughed and jeered when his words turned to her, pointing, spitting in the dust at her feet. One warrior shoved a bowl of dirty water into her hands, sneering as if she were beneath even that kindness. Clara's throat burned with thirst, but pride lifted her chin. She would not drink before their mocking eyes. Then she saw him. He stood at the edge of the circle, taller than the others, younger too, his shoulders broad, his face marked by war paint but not cruelty. His dark eyes locked onto hers, steady, watchful. There was no laughter in them, no scorn. He was carved of silence. But in that silence she felt something stir, a flicker of pity perhaps, or warning. Later, when the jeers had thinned, Clara was forced to scrub blood from a warrior's knife at the water trough. Her fingers trembled as she worked, the metal slick and red. Suddenly, a shadow fell across her. "Do not show them fear." The words came low, accented but clear enough in English to still her hands. She looked up and found the chief's son beside her. Closed now. She could see the fine scars across his jaw. The sun-browned skin stretched over sharp cheekbones. His gaze cut through her like a blade. Her lips parted, the words catching in her throat. Who are you?" He didn't answer. He simply reached, took the knife from her trembling grip, and with a quick motion finished what she could not. His movements were precise, practiced without cruelty. He set the blade down and straightened, his eyes flicking toward the other warriors who watched. "They wait for you to break," he murmured. "Do not." Clara swallowed hard, her heart thudding against her ribs. "And if I already have," she whispered. For the briefest moment, the corner of his mouth twitched. Not a smile, but something close. Then he turned, the feathers at his shoulder catching the dying light, and walked away. Clara stared after him, breath shallow, caught between dread and the strange, inexplicable spark his presence left behind. In the heart of her prison, the chief's son had become her only fragile thread of hope. Chapter 3, A Fragile Alliance. The days blurred together in heat and labor. Clara carried buckets from the creek until her shoulders ached, gathered wood until her hands blistered, and bent over fires that stung her eyes with smoke. The warriors mocked her clumsy movements, and the women turned their backs with sharp whispers. Every task was a test, every glance a reminder that she did not belong. But sometimes, when the desert wind shifted, she felt his gaze on her. Tahu, the chief's son. He did not laugh at her stumbles, nor join when others jeered. Instead, he watched in silence, his dark eyes unreadable, as though weighing her spirit. One evening, Clara knelt by the campfire, scrubbing a pot blackened with ash. The skin of her wrist was raw from the cords they kept tied too tight. A young warrior strode past, deliberately kicking sand into the food she had prepared. Laughter erupted around him. Clara froze, anger and shame burning her throat. Before she could react, Tahu stepped forward. He said something sharp in Apache, his voice low but edged with steel. The laughter died as quick as it rose. The young warrior muttered, slamming his spear but into the ground before retreating. Clara blinked, staring up at her unlikely defender. "Why?" she whispered, though she doubted he'd answer. Tahu crouched beside her, his movements fluid, deliberate. In the firelight, the paint on his skin glowed like molten gold. "Weakness invites wolves," he said quietly, in halting English. His gaze lingered on her scraped hands before lifting to her eyes. "Stand tall, even when you bleed." She wanted to scoff, to tell him she wasn't strong enough. But something in his tone rooted her tongue. He wasn't mocking her. He was warning her, teaching her. Later that night, as the camp settled into murmurs and shadows, Clara sat near the corral, listening to the restless horses snort in the cool dark. She almost didn't hear him approach. "You are not the first to be taken," Tahu said, his voice barely above the whisper of the wind. Clara hugged her knees, staring at the dust. "And what happens to the others?" He was silent for a long moment. When he spoke, his words were heavy, honest. "Most break. Some die. A few learn to survive." Her breath caught. "And me?" This time he met her gaze fully. In his eyes, she saw conflict, a war between loyalty to his people and something unspoken that drew him toward her. "That is for you to decide," he said. The coyotes howled in the distance, their cries carrying across the endless desert night. Clara shivered, not from the cold, but from the strange truth settling in her chest. The man she should fear most might be the only one keeping her alive. For the first time since her capture, she felt the fragile threads of an alliance forming, woven in whispers, in stolen moments, and in the silence of a desert that had seen too much blood. Chapter 4: Blood and Betrayal. The desert sun bled red across the horizon when trouble finally came. The camp buzzed with restless energy, warriors sharpening blades, women whispering over baskets of corn, children playing just beyond the fire pits. Clara felt in the air, the way the coyotes had gone quiet, the way the men's eyes followed her more hungrily than before. That evening, she carried a skin of water through the camp when one of the younger braves, half drunk on mezcal, staggered into her path. His grin was cruel, his hand seizing her arm with enough force to bruise. Clara gasped and twisted away, but the laughter that followed was sharp as knives. "Leave me," she hissed, trying to wrench free. The warrior only barked a command she couldn't understand, shoving her down into the dirt. The world tilted, faces circling, voices rising. Panic clawed at her chest. Then a voice cut through the chaos, low, commanding. "Say!" Tahu stepped into the circle, his shadow falling over her. He spoke in rapid Apache, each word like a whip crack. The drunk warrior snarled and spat in the dirt, but he didn't back down. Instead, he lunged. Clara's heart stopped. The clash was sudden, brutal. Fists met flesh, boots scuffed dust into the firelight. The warrior swung a blade, but Tahu caught his wrist, twisting until the knife clattered to the ground. The crowd roared as the two men fought, brothers in tribe, now enemies over a woman who didn't belong. Blood sprayed when Tahu struck, splitting the warrior's lip. Clara scrambled back, her bound wrists shaking as she watched. This wasn't just a fight, it was a challenge, a question of power. When at last Tahu drove his opponent to the dirt, holding a blade to his throat, the circle fell into silence. His chest heaved, sweat and blood glistening on his skin, his eyes blazing. Slowly, he lowered the knife, but the message was clear. None would touch her, not while he lived. The chief appeared then, towering in feathers and authority. His gaze burned into his son. He spoke slowly, his words heavy as stone. Clara couldn't understand, but she felt the meaning. The choice was being forced upon him. Tahu's jaw tightened. His hand curled into a fist, then loosened. Finally, he answered, his voice steady but sharp, like a man sealing his own fate. Clara saw in the faces of the warriors shock, anger, betrayal. By choosing her, he had set himself apart. As the crowd dispersed, Tahu turned, meeting Clara's eyes across the firelight. His voice was low, almost a vow. "You are mine now. That makes me enemy to many." Her breath caught. Her world had shifted once again. She had not asked for this bond, but in blood and betrayal it had been forged. Chapter 5: The Escape at Sunset. The sun sagged low, painting the desert in copper and blood. Smoke drifted lazily above the Apache camp, curling into the sky as if reluctant to leave. Clara's heart hammered against her ribs as she crouched in the shadows of a brush shelter, her wrists rubbed raw from days of rope. She knew something was coming. The way Tahu had kept his distance all afternoon, the way his eyes had burned with urgency when they met hers across the fire. When the camp settled, warriors drunk on mezcal and wearied from boasting of raids, Tahu came, silent as a shadow. He cut her bond with a single flick of his knife. The cords dropped to the dirt, and Clara stared at her freed hands as if they belonged to someone else. "Tahu," she whispered, her voice trembling. "Quiet," he breathed, his hand brushing her arm in warning. "No time." They moved through the camp like ghosts, slipping between lodges, ducking past the glow of fires. Clara's heart leapt at every laugh, every crack of wood in the flames. She could hear her own breath, ragged and desperate, louder than the desert wind. At the corral, Horses snorted nervously, sensing danger. Tahu swung onto the back of a paint mare, then pulled her up behind him with one strong arm. Her skirts tangled, her body pressed against his back, and for the briefest moment she felt the solid strength of him, the steady rhythm of his heartbeat. Then came the alarm. A shout rang across the camp, followed by another. Torches flared. Warriors poured in their shelters, bows raised, voices sharp with fury. "Hold on," Tahu growled. The mare lunged forward, hooves pounding, dust flying in a golden storm behind them. Arrows hissed past. One skimmed Clara's sleeve, another thunked into the saddle. She buried her face against Tahu's shoulder, clutching his waist as the wind tore her bonnet from her head. They thundered to the canyon, the walls echoing with hoofbeats and war cries. The chase was relentless. Shadows darting along the ridges, sparks of fire arrows streaking through the dusk. Tahu urged the mare harder, his body tense, every muscle braced. "Will they kill us?" Clara gasped, her voice nearly lost to the rush of air. "Not if we reach the river," he shouted back. The setting sun painted the sky in fire, and for a heartbeat, Clara thought the world itself was burning. Her fear twisted into something else, a wild, breathless exhilaration. She was no longer only running from death. She was racing with him, side by side against the whole world. When at last the campfires were swallowed by distance, when the cries of the pursuers faded into vast, endless desert, Tahu slowed the mare to a staggering trot. Both of them were drenched in sweat and dust, trembling from the escape. Clara clung to him still, her voice breaking into the quiet. "Why risk everything for me?" Tahu turned his head slightly, enough for her to catch the glint of his eyes in the fading light. "Because," he said low and certain, "you are worth more than they will ever understand." The desert wind carried his words away, but in Clara's chest they struck like an arrow, sharp, true, unforgettable. Chapter 6. A New Dawn, a Shared Destiny. By the time the stars thinned and the horizon softened into gray, Clara thought she could ride no farther. Her body ached, her lips cracked from thirst, and every bone felt rattled loose. But Tahu pressed on, guiding the mare through the broken desert until they found it. A hidden canyon, narrow and shielded by jagged rock. Inside, a ribbon of water shimmered faintly in the starlight, feeding a patch of green where sage and cottonwood clung to life. When the horse slowed to drink, Clara nearly collapsed, sliding down into the sand. Tahu was there in an instant, catching her beneath the arms. For the first time since her capture, she did not flinch from his touch. Instead, she leaned into him, trembling with exhaustion. "You are safe here," he said softly, his English thick with accent but steady. "They will not find us." Clara lifted her eyes to his, searching for doubt, but found only certainty. Her throat tightened. "Safe," she whispered, as if testing the word for the first time. Tahu knelt beside the water, cupping his hands to bring her a drink. She pressed her lips to his palms, tasting the cold sweetness, and when she looked up, the closeness of him stole her breath. Dust streaked his face, a thin cut blood along his temple, yet his eyes, dark as midnight, held something fierce and unyielding. "You defied your people for me," she said, voice quivering. "You could have let me die, and no one would have questioned it. Why?" For a long moment, he was silent. The desert stirred around them, the rustle of sage in the breeze, the distant cry of a lone coyote, the hush of water on stone. Finally, he reached for her hand, rough fingers closing over her scraped knuckles. "Because I saw your spirit," he answered, strong, proud. "You would not bow, even when broken. I could not let the fire die." Tears stung her eyes. She lowered her head, but he lifted her chin gently, forcing her to meet his gaze. "No one will harm you again," he vowed, voice low as thunder. "Not while I breathe." The words struck deep, shattering the last walls of her fear. Clara's breath hitched, and then she leaned forward, pressing her forehead against his. It was not the embrace of captor and captive, but of two souls bound by trial and fire. The first light of dawn spilled across the canyon, painting the rocks gold. In its glow, Clara felt the weight of the past, the blood, the humiliation, the loss, slip away, leaving only the fragile promise of what could come. Together, they sat in the hush of morning, two outcasts forged into something new, neither Apache nor settler, neither slave nor master, but man and woman bound by destiny. And as the desert woke around them, Clara knew with aching certainty, whatever storms lay ahead, she would face them at Tahu's side. The sun bled out across the horizon, laying the plains in fire and shadow. Horses grazed quietly nearby, their silhouettes etched against the dying light. The faint murmur of a distant saloon drifted on the wind. Laughter, fiddle music, the clink of glasses, a reminder of the world they'd left behind. But here at the edge of the prairie, only the sage-scented breeze and the hush of twilight surrounded them. Clara stood beside Tahu, her skirts brushing the dry grass, her hand finding his callous one. Their journey had been carved in blood and fear. But now, standing free beneath the wide-open sky, she felt the weight of it fall away. "I never thought I'd see tomorrow," she whispered, her voice trembling. "Not after everything." Tahu turned to her, his dark eyes catching the last ember of daylight. "You will see many tomorrows," he said softly, "and I will walk each one with you." Her breath hitched, tears glimmering as she smiled, small but certain. She leaned into him, resting her head against his chest, listening to the steady rhythm of his heart against the wild backdrop of the west. As the first stars blinked into being, Clara whispered the words she had carried in silence since the night of her capture. "You weren't just my salvation, Tahu. You are my home." He pressed his forehead to hers, the desert wind swirling around them, and answered with quiet conviction, "Then we are free together." The screen of dust closed, leaving them silhouetted in love against the endless frontier.